Hi everybody, it's Laura from Green Tree, and today we are talking about different kinds of dairy milks. So, a dairy milk is more or less a milk that comes from a mammal, as opposed to a milk that is plant-based. But I'm going to talk specifically about three different kinds. One you may be less familiar with is sheep. This is actually a sheep yogurt, but sheep milk is kind of hard to come by, so this is going to be our example. So we're going to talk about sheep milk, goat milk, and cow milk, and the difference between the three types. So probably the biggest thing, at least the most striking to me, is that cow's milk has much larger fat globules, right? So you're going to see on yogurts, and this is obviously backwards, but cream top is something you can see on cow's milk yogurt. And that's because the fat globules in cow's milk are much larger than the fat globules in sheep or goat milk. And what that means is the fat, the cream, will naturally separate out when you are dealing with cow's milk. But sheep and goat milks are naturally homogenized. So that's what they do to a gallon of cow's milk when you can leave it sit in your fridge for a week and the cream won't rise to the top anymore. It's been homogenized. The fat globules have been broken up so they will stay mixed with the rest of the milk. Now that is a natural thing that occurs with sheep and goat, which is why you don't see sheep cream and goat cream, because there has to be an actual process gone through to separate that fat from the rest of the product. Whereas, like I said, with the cow's milk, you'll get that cream top because it separates out on its own. Now, the other big difference that happens because of those different sized fat molecules is that goat milk especially, and sheep milk also, are easier to digest. Because those fat molecules are smaller, they move more easily through the digestive system. And one of the things that I read actually said the digestive time that it takes for goat milk is only about a half an hour, where for cow's milk it's actually closer to 2 full hours. And it's because of the size of those fat molecules and the way they break down in your system. Now, another big difference between them is, it's not a huge difference in terms of the actual quantity, but it does make a difference in terms of the taste. Goat milk has less lactose, which is the type of milk sugars, essentially, than cow's milk does. And sheep's milk, again, I'm showing you the yogurt, sheep's milk has more lactose. So sheep's milk tends to taste kind of sweet. Goat's milk has almost a tartness to it. And cow's milk is that kind of neutral taste that most of us are kind of familiar with. Even if you don't drink milk now, you've probably had it at some point and kind of know what I'm talking about. So, in terms of lactose intolerance, there isn't a big difference in the amount of lactose from sheep, goat, and cow, but there is if you're looking at taste. So if you can't have lactose, you probably still need it to be broken down in some way, like it would be if you got yourself some yogurt. So when you have yogurt or cheese, that lactose, regardless of which kind of dairy milk it comes from, has been partially broken down by the cultures that are used to produce that tangy thickness that you're getting in the milk once it's been put through this process. And that breaks down a lot of the sugars. That's why it's tangy. And so that's why these kind of cultured, processed milks tend to be easier to digest for people with lactose intolerance. My experience has been the fresher the cheese, like the closer it is to milk, the more trouble you're likely to have. And the longer it's been aged and broken down, the less of that lactose and the easier it probably will be on your system. Although everybody's got different levels of tolerance. So, another interesting thing about sheep, goat, and cow milk is you've probably heard a little bit about the A1 versus A2 casein proteins in milk, and people talking about how different types of cows have different levels and referring to A1 or A2 milk. Well, sheep milk and goat milk naturally have more of the A2 type of the casein protein than the A1. So for people who have an issue with inflammation levels being higher when they're consuming that A1 type milk, sheep and goat milk will be a lot easier to digest and should theoretically produce less inflammation in the system. I'm not a scientist, so I haven't tested it myself, but that's my understanding of the topic. Let's see. Oh, as many of you probably know from personal experience, goat milk has a flavor. If you've ever had goat cheese, you'll also notice that. And that's just something that's natural to goats. It's something that they produce in the milk. It is affected by what they eat, just the way that if a cow gets into an onion patch or a strawberry patch, the milk will taste different depending on which one they had. Same kind of thing with goats. Like, their diet will affect the flavor, as will the type of goat, just like the type of cow will affect the fattiness of the milk and the flavor of the milk. But goat milk has, to some people, kind of a funky, intense taste to it, just like goat cheese does. But sheep's milk really doesn't, for the most part. So that's why you'll sometimes see cheeses like this one. This is a Greek feta that is a blend of sheep and goat. So it's a little milder, a little more like a cow's milk feta, but it still has a bit of that traditional goatiness to it that stands out so much in feta dishes. So it's kind of a neat combination that you can have two non-cow milks and get that blend of flavor because the sheep milk is so mild. It actually has more of the good type of fat as well, the medium chain triglyceride fats. Both the goat and sheep milk have more of that kind of fat than cow's milk does. So even though that means typically more calories, so if you don't want that level of fat, cow's milk is a good choice. But the type of fat that the goat and sheep milk has is more digestible and is what is commonly referred to as a healthy fat. So that's a little bit better depending on what you need in your diet. Let's see. Oh, goat milk, fun fact, of all the dairy milks that I was able to find information on, is the most similar in structure to human milk. Yes, Rick, goatiness is a definite thing. But goat milk is also the most similar to human milk in structure. I don't know about flavor, I can't speak to that, but I will say that the reason many people who are sensitive to dairy have an easier time digesting goat milk is it is more similar to the structure that we're used to as small babies. So it can be more digestible for that reason as well. Finally, I'm checking my notes to make sure I don't miss any big facts for you guys. Oh yeah, so this is an interesting fact about me, I guess. Growing up, I grew up with both goats and cows, and so I have milked both goats and cows and experienced what that process is like. It's time consuming, and you have to have fairly solid grip strength in your hands. It's a lot of repetitive motion like that. But cows and goats will stand there and be completely happy to have you milk them, unless that particular individual cow or goat is really grouchy and has kind of a unpleasant personality, which can happen, just like with dogs or cats or people. Everybody's got their own personality. But most cows and goats are pretty happy to be milked. The milk builds up and builds pressure, and they want that released out of their system. Sheep, on the other hand, this is something I just learned today because I have never tried to milk a sheep. I have had sheep, but I've never tried to milk them, are apparently very skittish. They're more of a prey animal, like a deer would be, and they kind of freeze up if startled. And I guess they're also more aggressive when they're in a milking situation. So part of the reason that you don't see people having sheep milk farms very much is because sheep are much more difficult to milk than goats or cows. So it's kind of cool that we not only have the sheep cheeses, which you see occasionally, but we also have this cool sheep yogurt. I'm actually going to sample this today. If anybody wants to try it, you come down until about 6, I think. I'm going to do a sheep milk yogurt, a sheep goat cheese blend, a sheep cheese, which this one is Spanish. This is different than the feta, the manchego, because it is it's been aged, and so it's a harder, more nutty cheese. You can kind of see the texture there. It doesn't want to autofocus on it. There you go. You can see it's got some of the little bubbles and the little bit of crystalline feel that you get when it's aged longer. But because it is from sheep milk, it's milder, even though it's an aged cheese. It doesn't get quite as tangy and intense as a goat or a cow cheese does, even when it's aged. So if you want to try a couple different pieces of sheep dairy today. You can come down and check those out. And one last little tip that I'm going to throw out there for you guys, if you stuck it out this long, is so fruit actually goes great with dairy and cheese. Blueberries in particular, I like with cheese in things like salads. And if you've never tried it, I really recommend taking something saltier and more intense like the feta, blueberries, and then adding some kind of spicy green into your blend like dandelion or arugula. And if you toss that all up as a salad, maybe with some toasted nuts and a nice like a balsamic vinaigrette dressing or something with a little bit of tanginess to it, not real heavy because you don't want to cover up the flavor of the blueberries and cheese. It's actually a great flavor combination. You can do it with grapes too, but this time of year, the blueberries are actually really good. The ones that have been coming in lately, I think they're in season somewhere else in the country. And that combo is really tasty. So if you're looking for a new way to mellow out your goatier cheeses, try it in a salad with blueberries and some of those tangy flavors, and you might be pleasantly surprised. It'll remind you that spring is coming. We're actually less than 3 weeks from the official first day of spring. Whether that will mean anything actually thaws in Michigan or not remains to be seen, but we can at least hope, right? Well, in the meantime, I hope you guys have a great Tuesday, and like I said, you want to try some sheep dairy, come on down. I'll be sampling them till about 6. Bye, everybody.